Hey, it's your old pal Lucid Stu again, and this time we'll leave the confines of the United States, so put your thinking toques on and we'll head for the Great White North, eh? Canada recently announced it would be spending $4 billion Canadian to develop and design a high-speed rail project. 3 groups bid on the project: the so-called Cadence Group, which includes a wing of SNCF, France's state-owned railway company, was chosen as the winning proposal. Importantly, Canada retains the rights to the 2 losing bids as well, so things could turn out slightly differently than the winning proposal. As far as I can tell, based on travel times and maps, the Cadence proposal is very close to one produced by Alstom in 2022. I will use that as a basis for this video. We'll explore that proposal, examining the route as it stands. I will also give an alternative version with sensible alterations for an even faster trip. Let's look at the places we're going to visit, starting with Toronto, home of the Maple Leafs. Toronto has a metro population of 7.1 million. That is the largest metro in Canada and 7th largest in North America, behind Houston, Texas. It is the provincial capital of Ontario. Transit in Toronto is provided by the Toronto Transit Commission and GO Transit. The two combined provide bus, BRT, streetcars, light rail, commuter rail, and subways. Toronto even has ferries. Sorry, no aerial trams or monorails though. Toronto's main train station is Union Station. It is the 2nd busiest train station in North America by passenger volume, behind only New York Penn. Union Station features a rail link to Toronto Pearson International Airport and hosts intercity passenger rail provided by Via Rail and Amtrak. Next we have Montreal, metro population of 4.6 million. That is the 2nd largest metro in Canada. Montreal is 500 kilometers from Toronto, making the 2 largest Canadian metros an ideal high-speed rail pairing. Transit in Montreal is provided by STM, which features rubber-tired metro and bus services. There is a light metro system, the REM, owned by CDPQ Infra. Commuter rail in the area is provided by EXO, which also provides commuter bus service. Intercity passenger rail is once again provided by Via Rail and Amtrak. Montreal's largest train station by volume is Gare Centrale, but for this video we'll concentrate on the secondary station Lucien Lallier, which has newly renovated platforms. Lucien Lallier shares a building with Bell Centre, which houses the home ice of the Habs. Despite the presence of the Habs, Montreal is probably best known as the birthplace of Luc Robitaille. Up next, 160 kilometers west of Montreal is the Ottawa-Gatineau Metro, home of the Senators, with a population of 1.6 million. Ottawa is Canada's capital city. Just across the Ottawa River from the parliamentary complex in Gatineau is the Ile de Hull, which of course is the former kingdom of Blackhawks great Bobby Hull. Transit in the Ottawa area is provided by OC Transpo via bus, BRT, and light rail services. Ottawa's main train station is Ottawa Station. Intercity rail is provided here by Via Rail. On the far northeastern end of the route is Quebec City, former home of the Nordiques, which is naturally the capital city of the province of Quebec. Quebec City has a metro population of 900,000. Transit in the area is by bus through RTC. The main train station is the gorgeous Gare du Palais in the heart of the city, which you would swear was in Europe if you didn't know any better. Intercity passenger rail here is provided by Via Rail. Adjacent to the station is a sizable Orléans Express bus terminal, which is sort of the Quebecois equivalent of Greyhound, only nicer. Along the route, we have the smaller cities of Peterborough and Trois-Rivieres, which we will discuss when we reach them with the train. Our technology choice is still up in the air at this point. The Alstom Avelia Liberty, as suggested by Alstom, seems less likely at the moment. What's that all about? One of the rejected proposals included Deutsche Bahn, so Siemens might be out as well. I don't have an Avilia model, but I do have one for a Siemens Volaro. Our top speed is specified as 300 kilometers per hour, which leans a tiny bit toward tilting, as most non-tilting sets can do 320. Anyway, let's head back to Toronto and we'll ride the rails while exploring a possible route for high-speed rail in Canada that has been branded Alto. We are coming out of Toronto Union Station, and the first thing we need to recognize is that speed through all cities is likely to be on the slower side, with the faster portions between. Alstom uses the American Northeast Corridor as an analog. This will be about 1/3 longer and should be able to travel end to end about an hour faster. We'll see if that rings true. Once out of the core of Toronto, the route makes a hard left at the Don River and continues up an abandoned rail right-of-way through the Don River Valley and Don River Park, fittingly next to Don Valley Parkway. That's a lot of Dons, a lot of rivers, and a lot of parks, and a lot of valleys. It looks like a 3,700 meter rail viaduct across the valley at Bayview Avenue might need to be rebuilt. If so, this would be one of the more expensive structures within the project. This would eventually join Canadian Pacific right-of-way, which is apparently quite busy in the Toronto area, but it's a wide right-of-way with room for more tracks. Some additional viaduct structures may be necessary. That then reaches a sizable Canadian Pacific yard, but there is room to go around it with a couple of new tracks. The route peels off to the northeast following the Canadian Pacific Havelock subdivision, which is not ideal, but was likely chosen due to lower freight volume. We'll briefly look at a greenfield route between Toronto and Ottawa later. This is pretty curvy for the remaining 95 kilometers to Peterborough, which is the first indicated stop. The Alstom study puts this entire area at 144 kilometers per hour or less. Peterborough is a city of 80,000 in a metro area of 130,000. As far as I can tell, the plan is to stop here because it's the only place between Toronto and Ottawa on this line with any real population. Functionally, the quote-unquote high-speed rail between here and Toronto would be more like commuter rail. There isn't a great place to put a station near the center of Peterborough, so I have one in the southwest corner of town near Highway 7. This is one of the few places in Peterborough with room for ground-level platforms and a station that also has room around it for transit-oriented development. From Toronto to Peterborough, it is 118 kilometers. I have that taking 51 minutes with a high-speed tilting train. That is 139 kilometers per hour on average. I warned you. Moving out of the station, the train would then traverse the rest of Peterborough and then head east over the Otonabee River. The right-of-way east of Peterborough isn't much better than west of Peterborough, and that continues 35 kilometers to Havelock, where the route becomes abandoned and turns into the Trans-Canada Trail. The geometry for that is not great either. That runs through mostly wilderness with the exceptions of the villages of Tweed and Charboot Lake. Going through both of those would be slow, so it might be better to go around. The abandoned rail route continues 150 kilometers east before rejoining Canadian Pacific right-of-way near Perth. 15 miles further to the east, the routing requires transitioning onto the Smith Falls subdivision to the northeast toward Ottawa. This would happen in a broad high-speed curve between two straight, potentially fast sections. The routing into Ottawa is pretty straight until hitting the metro area. The Alstom map has this as 200 kilometers per hour, but I think it could be faster in parts. That is rural with minimal crossings and plenty of room for additional tracks. Once in Ottawa, the train would slow to 144 kilometers per hour or less, as it is set to do in all cities. Unfortunately, Ottawa's train station is not the best placed. It's about 4 kilometers from downtown in an area full of suburban shopping centers. It does fortunately have a light rail station next to it, and that leads directly into downtown. Back to our train, there is a slow curve that leads into Ottawa Station, and then we have arrived. Though pretty suburban in layout and design, there is some land around the station that is ready to be developed. Some office buildings have already sprouted. We've made it from Toronto to Ottawa. This is 396 kilometers and could be traversed in this manner in 3 hours 5 minutes. That is 128 kilometers per hour. Compare that to our Alstom chart. With that, we will part the capital city of Ottawa and continue on to Montreal and Quebec. Coming out of Ottawa, the route is dead straight for 35 kilometers on Via Rail right-of-way, and Alstom has this marked as 200 kilometers per hour. I'm not sure what the deal is here because it's mostly rural, single-tracked, and plenty of room for more tracks. 25 kilometers or so of top speed should be no problem here. That situation ends at the town of Castleman, where the route enters a series of undesirable curves stretching over 65 kilometers before reaching Canadian Pacific right-of-way once more and transitioning to that in a high-speed curve. Same situation as Smith Falls. You have straight sections on either side, may as well run fast through the curve. On the far western end of the Montreal Metro, Canadian Pacific meets up with Canadian National, and they run in a joint right-of-way for 25 kilometers toward Montreal. This is a huge right-of-way with room for 10 or 12 tracks. Currently only has 4. At least one additional track would be nice because XO runs a service out here that has stations only a kilometer or 2 apart. More tracks than that will be difficult in spots, however. A stop at Montreal's main airport is possible here, but not really necessary as XO serves an airport station and a separate connection with the REM is also planned. Near the airport, the route would separate from Canadian National tracks. Then we will travel into Lucien-Lallier on 3 tracks the rest of the way, and that basically just needs to be electrified. It unfortunately appears that Montreal is set up on a spur within this system and that Lucien-Lallier is meant to continue to act as a terminus. Trains will presumably reverse at the station and then continue on quote-unquote backwards, probably with 50-50 forward-facing seating. From Ottawa to Montreal on this route, it is 176 kilometers. I have that taking 58 minutes with a tilter. That is a 182 kilometer per hour average. Toronto to Montreal, which is the most important pair, would be 4 hours 5 minutes. Leaving Montreal, the train would round a tight curve and head north for Laval. Don't expect this portion of the route to be high speed at all. It's going to wander around for a while trying to get out of the area and will stop at Laval on the way basically because it's there. You're most likely looking at a new double-tracked bridge over the Prairie River. The most likely stop in Laval is the current Gare de la Concorde. This is a typical 2-platform suburban station just outside of the core of Laval. It has the advantage of sharing the space with a metro station, which is a single stop from the end of the line in the more developed part of Laval. The area around Gare de la Concorde is also developing, and there is some room to grow, though it is somewhat hemmed in by single-family homes. Between Montreal and Laval, this train would function more like a commuter express. 13 kilometers as the crow flies, but 26 kilometers by rail. This would take 18 minutes. On the way out of Laval to the north, one more tight curve with a radius of about 300 meters, and then things can start speeding up a little. The rather slow portion from Lucien-Lallier to here would be 30 kilometers. If we consult our Alstom map, we now have a long 200 to 300 kilometer per hour stretch. That will be on the 200 kilometer per hour side until Terrebonne, and then things straighten out finally for some full speed travel. This section between Laval and Trois-Rivieres is about 100 kilometers with a few faster curves. The one exception is Louisville, which would be closer to 120 kilometers per hour. Most of these can be straightened out with a little damage. I'll include that work in our super duper speedy but sensible version near the end of this presentation. Trois-Rivieres itself is kind of tough because a bunch of industrial spurs and a big curve lead into the station site, which is near a yard. This station hasn't been used for passenger rail in decades, but it is owned by Via Rail and could be reconstituted. It is a lovely, somewhat imposing stone structure less than a kilometer from the core of Trois-Rivieres. Unfortunately, the area has somewhat limited redevelopment potential. Laval to Trois-Rivieres is our fastest section so far thanks to the long high-speed stretch. 134 kilometers taking 38 minutes, that is 211 kilometers per hour. Out of the station to the north, tracks would require a rather busy yard be moved west by 10 meters. A couple of bridge replacements are likely, including the 360-meter single-tracked bridge over the Saint-Maurice River. Things are pretty fast directly east of Trois-Rivieres, where 300 kilometers per hour once again looks good. Higher speed will continue to be the case for 60 kilometers before reaching the Deschambault area. From there to Quebec City, the route is significantly slower with a few bursts of speed. 13 kilometers from the center of Quebec City, there is an opportunity for a station at Jean Lesage International Airport. It isn't listed in the literature, but might be a nice option for Quebec City and also Trois-Rivieres. Through the country, the route is single-tracked, but directly east of the airport, things get crowded around a Quebec-Gatineau railway yard, as well as a junction with Canadian National. Some taking of property or movement of existing track, or both, will likely be necessary in this area. Difficulties continue near Gare du Palais with a Canadian National Yard that will be difficult to circumvent with more than one additional track. There is also an older double-tracked bridge over the St. Charles River, which may need to be replaced with a wider bridge since freight here hooks up with the nearby Port de Quebec. The station is hemmed in by the historic core and a freeway, so unfortunately there isn't much redevelopment potential directly around the station. But anyway, we've made it to Quebec City and the lovely Gare du Palais. Let's check travel times. It is 126 kilometers from Trois-Rivieres to Quebec City. I have that taking 50 minutes for an average of 151 kilometers per hour. Montreal to Quebec City would be an hour and 50 minutes, and finally, end-to-end, Toronto to Quebec City, the full 994 kilometer system, that would be 6 hours 5 minutes with a tilting train. And how does that compare to the Alstom and Cadence estimates? Looks pretty good except for Toronto to Ottawa, which comes up short by an hour and 5 minutes. If we go back to the map, we see about 60% of that is marked 200 to 300 kilometers per hour, which the existing right-of-way definitely doesn't support. As a result, I went through and tried to make all of these pairs as fast as reasonably possible. This is what I got. 1 hour 57 minutes Toronto to Ottawa. The Toronto area is a limiting factor, but I didn't mess around outside of the urban areas. This tells me in between will mostly be new 300 kilometer per hour right-of-way if they design the final product to this standard. On the other pairs, I'm assuming running in the same corridor with freight will be a limiting factor. It doesn't look like they would need to escape existing corridors too much to achieve these times, so they'll probably save the money. Toronto-Montreal is the big city pair, so an investment in new right-of-way there makes sense. Overall, 4 hours 40 minutes end-to-end and 3 hours Toronto to Montreal looks well within the realm of possibility. That is mainly with a tilting train, but non-tilting could also make that time with extensive improvements, so who knows? But it might be an Alstom Avilia Liberté Canada. Hope you can stomach it. Luckily, that isn't the only tilting train on the market, eh? I do not have a cost estimate for you, but estimates thrown around have generally been in the $60 to $80 billion Canadian range. At 994 kilometers, that comes out to 80 million Canadian per kilometer, which falls within the typical range worldwide. Closer to 60 billion would be a relatively good deal. One last thing from an American perspective, this project is important to us because it could potentially link 3 different US high-speed rail corridors at very little cost to the American taxpayer. That might just spur high-speed rail construction in the Great Lakes and Rust Belt areas, leading to a Great Northern dual-country high-speed rail system that would look like this. Something to think about, and one of many reasons to stay pals with our friendly neighbors to the north. But enough of my opinion, what do you all think of this? Can Canada suffer through a Trump administration and still utilize an American-made high-speed train set? Let me know in the comments. Big thanks to Kyber Sen from the Stew Crew Discord server and the Effective Transit Alliance for their help on this video. Do us a favor and check out the ETA website, link in the description. That will be next to the invite for the Stew Crew server if you'd like to join our motley crew, me hearty. Plenty more videos to come. Up next is Stew's News on April 1st. After that, I will finally be switching rendering to the new computer, so we'll see what impact that has on output. But that's all for now. Until next time, I'll see you on that big, beautiful freeway.